The sun burned mercilessly over the desert training ground, turning the sand beneath their boots into a shimmering furnace. Heat waves rippled across the open field where dozens of soldiers stood in loose clusters, their uniforms darkened with sweat and dust. This place had no mercy, no shade, no comfort, and no patience for weakness. It was designed that way. She stood among them, quiet and still. Her name was Sergeant Ava Cole, though most of the men around her barely bothered to remember it. To them, she was just the woman, the anomaly assigned to their unit 3 weeks earlier. She didn't talk much, she didn't joke, she didn't complain. She simply trained day after day with a focus that bordered on unsettling. A few soldiers whispered as she passed, "Can't believe they sent her here." One muttered, not bothering to lower his voice, "Yeah." Another chuckled, "Bet she won't last a month." Ava heard every word. She always did, but she didn't react. She adjusted the straps on her gloves and stared forward, her expression unreadable. The unit had been ordered to stand down for a brief break. Helmets came off. Canteens were raised. Someone cracked a joke about the heat, and laughter rippled through the ranks. The tension of training dissolved into casual arrogance, the kind that thrived in places where reputation mattered more than reality. That was when Corporal Mason Reed stepped forward. Mason was everything the others admired: tall, broad-shouldered, and loud. He had the confidence of a man who had never been seriously challenged and the approval of a group that rewarded bravado. He wiped sweat from his forehead and glanced at Ava, a crooked grin spreading across his face. "So," he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear, "this is the famous edition they warned us about." A few heads turned. Some smirked, others crossed their arms, curious. Ava didn't answer. Mason chuckled. "Not much of a talker, huh?" He stepped closer. "Guess that's smart. Less embarrassing when you fall behind." A ripple of laughter followed. One soldier called out, "Hey Mason, maybe she's here for morale." More laughter. Ava slowly turned her head and met Mason's gaze. Her eyes were steady, cold even, but calm, no anger, no fear, just focus. That seemed to amuse him even more. "Look," Mason continued, gesturing toward the makeshift training table nearby, "we're killing time anyway. Why don't we see what you're made of?" He slammed his elbow onto the table and curled his hand into position. "Arm wrestle." The crowd stirred instantly. Soldiers gathered closer, forming a loose circle around the table. Whispers grew louder. Phones were discreetly pulled out before being quickly shoved away. Rules were rules, after all. Ava looked at the table, then at Mason's arm, corded with muscle, veins bulging beneath sunburned skin. She said nothing. "Oh, come on." Mason pressed. "What's wrong?" Scared. That word hung in the air like a challenge. Ava exhaled slowly and stepped forward. The laughter softened, replaced by intrigued murmurs. She rolled up the sleeve of her fatigues and placed her elbow on the table. Her arm didn't look impressive, lean, compact, but there was something about the way she positioned herself. Precise, controlled. Mason leaned in, grinning. "I'll go easy." Ava finally spoke. Her voice was low, even. "Don't." The circle went silent for a moment, then erupted into laughter again. "Did you hear that?" Someone snorted. "She's confident." Mason shook his head, amused. "All right, Sergeant, let's do this." A senior instructor glanced over but didn't intervene. This wasn't officially sanctioned, but it wasn't forbidden either. Sometimes soldiers needed to learn lessons the hard way. Hands locked. The heat felt heavier now. Dust clung to skin. Sweat dripped from brows. Every eye was fixed on the table. On 3, someone called out. 1. Ava's grip tightened, not visibly, but decisively. 2. Mason leaned forward, muscles flexing, already anticipating victory. 3. The match began. For the first second, nothing moved. Mason's grin faltered. Ava's arm didn't shake. Her posture didn't change. She stared at their locked hands, breathing evenly, as if waiting. The laughter faded. Mason's smile slowly disappeared, replaced by confusion, and that was when the crowd realized something was wrong. This wasn't going the way they expected. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Mason's arm remained upright, locked in place, his muscles rigid and flexed to their limit. He waited for the resistance to crumble, to feel Ava's arm give way like he had felt so many times before against weaker opponents. That was how these things always went, but it didn't. Instead, a strange pressure pushed back against him. Steady, unyielding, almost mechanical. His smile twitched, then froze. What the hell? He muttered under his breath. Ava didn't look at his face. Her eyes stayed fixed on their joined hands, her jaw relaxed, her breathing slow and controlled. There was no strain in her posture, no wasted movement. It was as if she were holding a position she'd practiced 1,000 times before. Around them, the crowd shifted. Why isn't he moving her? Someone whispered. Mason gritted his teeth and leaned in harder, dragging his shoulder closer to the table for leverage. The muscles in his neck stood out like cables. A vein pulsed at his temple. Come on, he growled, more to himself than anyone else. Still, nothing. Ava's arm didn't drop an inch. A murmur spread through the circle. The early laughter was gone now, replaced by sharp curiosity. Soldiers exchanged glances. A few stepped closer, eyes narrowing as they reassessed what they were seeing. Mason inhaled sharply and surged again, pouring his weight into the push. This time, Ava's arm moved, but only slightly, tilting a few degrees before stopping cold. Her eyes flicked up to his for the first time. There was no mockery in them, only warning. Mason felt it then, a flicker of unease crawling up his spine. This wasn't supposed to be happening. He had strength, size, experience, and yet she was matching him, not fighting wildly, not panicking, controlling. Stop playing, he snapped. Ava's lips tightened, not into a smile, not into a frown, just a subtle shift. I'm not, she replied. She adjusted her footing, boots digging into the sand for traction. Her elbow remained planted, her wrist perfectly aligned. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to push. At first, Mason thought he was imagining it, then his arm dipped another fraction of an inch. Hey, he barked, trying to correct, pulling back with a sudden jerk. Too late, the balance had changed. Ava's movement was smooth, relentless. No jerks, no bursts of wasted strength, just constant pressure, like a hydraulic press coming down 1 millimeter at a time. Mason's breathing grew ragged. The crowd went silent. Dust drifted through the air, kicked up by shifting boots. Somewhere, a canteen hit the ground and rolled, forgotten. Every pair of eyes was glued to the table now. She's pushing him back. Someone murmured in disbelief. Mason's arm trembled. His forearm burned as lactic acid flooded the muscle. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. He tried to reposition again, but Ava anticipated the move, subtly adjusting her grip to shut it down before it could gain momentum. How? Mason gasped, teeth clenched. Ava leaned in slightly, her voice calm but firm. You rely on power, she said quietly. I rely on control. With that, she increased the pressure. Mason's arm dropped another inch. A collective gasp rippled through the soldiers. No way, someone whispered. Mason snarled and gave one last explosive shove, pouring everything he had into the effort. His shoulder screamed in protest. His vision blurred at the edges. For half a second, Ava's arm stalled. Then she pushed back harder. Mason's wrist bent. Pain shot through his forearm. Sharp, electric, unexpected. His confidence shattered in an instant, replaced by panic. Stop, he barked, suddenly aware that he was losing control of the situation. But Ava didn't slam his arm down. She held him there, suspended. pinned in a position that made the message unmistakably clear. The strongest man in the circle stuck. The soldiers stared in stunned silence. Mouths hung open. No one laughed now. No one joked. Ava met Mason's eyes again. "You still think this is a game?" she asked. His answer came in the form of a strained breath and a trembling arm, and everyone watching knew the truth. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was a lesson. The silence around the table felt heavier than the desert heat. Mason's arm hovered inches above defeat, trembling violently now. His teeth were clenched so hard, his jaw ached, breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. The confidence that had fueled his taunts minutes earlier was gone, burned away by disbelief and pain. "End it," someone muttered from the crowd. "Just pin him already." Ava didn't. She held the pressure steady, her arm locked in place like steel. Sweat rolled down her temple, catching the sunlight, but her expression remained composed, focused, disciplined. This wasn't about humiliation. It never had been. It was about respect. "Mason," she said, her voice low but carrying clearly in the dead quiet, "tap out." The words hit him harder than any shove. Tap out. The idea alone felt unbearable. Around them stood men he had trained with, joked with, dominated in contests like this. Men who had always assumed he would win, just as he had. "I'm not," he growled, trying to force his arm back up. That was the mistake. Ava felt it instantly, the shift in his balance, the desperate surge of uncontrolled strength. She reacted on instinct, tightening her grip, correcting the angle of his wrist to protect the joint while maintaining control, but Mason kept pushing. "Stop," Ava warned, louder now. He didn't hear her. Or maybe he did, and pride drowned it out. His arm buckled another inch. Pain flared through his forearm, sharp and blinding. Mason let out a raw cry, half rage, half fear. His knees bent slightly as his body betrayed him. "Medic!" Someone shouted instinctively. The crowd surged forward, but no one touched them. Ava released pressure immediately, stepping back as Mason tore his arm free and stumbled away from the table. He clutched his forearm to his chest, breathing hard, eyes wide with shock. The contest was over, not with a slam, but with a realization. Dust settled slowly around their boots. The desert wind whispered through the open ground, carrying the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. Mason dropped to one knee, supported by two soldiers who rushed to his side. He wasn't screaming anymore, just staring at his arm, flexing his fingers cautiously, as if trying to convince himself it still worked. Ava stood where she was, hands open, palms facing down, non-threatening. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't celebrated, hadn't even smiled. The instructor finally stepped in, eyes sharp as he surveyed the scene. "What happened?" he demanded. No one answered right away. Then a voice from the back said quietly, "She told him to tap." That single sentence cut through everything. The instructor looked at Ava. She met his gaze and nodded once. "I warned him." He studied her for a long moment, then turned to Mason. "You all right?" Mason swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said, though his voice lacked conviction, just strained it. The instructor didn't press further. He straightened and addressed the unit, back to formation. The soldiers moved automatically, but the energy was different now. Conversations were hushed. Glances kept drifting toward Ava, not mocking, not amused. Measured, as they formed up, Mason was helped to his feet. Before he joined the line, he hesitated. Then, slowly, he turned back toward Ava. For a moment, it looked like he might say something sharp, defensive, bitter. Instead, he lowered his eyes. "I didn't think," he said quietly, so only those nearby could hear, "You were that strong." Ava shook her head once. Strength wasn't the point. He looked up, confusion flickering across his face. Control was. Mason nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Then he stepped into formation without another word. The instructor paced in front of the unit, hands clasped behind his back. "Today," he said, "some of you learned something important." His eyes swept across the faces, lingering just a second longer on those who had laughed earlier. In this uniform, assumptions get people hurt. Out there, under fire, respect isn't optional, it's survival. No one spoke. Ava stood at attention, eyes forward, heart still pounding beneath her calm exterior. She could feel the weight of their stares, but it didn't bother her. She hadn't come here to prove she was better. She had come to prove she belonged, and judging by the silence that followed her every step as they marched off the field, the message had landed. This unit would never look at her the same way again.